Hello everybody and welcome to another amazing video of DIY investing. As you guys know, Bitcoin continues to break out and altcoins are also nearing a breakout of an over 500-day accumulation bottom. When we're comparing it to prior cycles and looking at our last bear market in 2018, we ended up seeing that the altcoins took about the exact same amount of time before they started breaking out again. We're only 4 months away before our next Bitcoin halving, and historically speaking, Bitcoin halvings have always marked the biggest turning point in the price of Bitcoin. Going forward with this video, I'm going to be breaking down the charts, explaining exactly what I think is about to be playing out for the rest of this year and how the market is going to play out as we get ready for our halving following 2024. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and with that being said, let's jump right into this amazing video today. Alrighty guys, here we are to start off today's video, and as you guys can see, Bitcoin continues to break out and maintain higher highs in this trend. We've been talking a lot about this, wondering whether or not we were just going to maintain this main trend line or whether we were going to end up seeing a deeper pullback, something to kind of swipe out these ranges. But the thing I was always maintaining was the fact that I didn't think we were going to get that lucky to have such an obvious buy opportunity, because when we're looking at the total market cap, for this thing to sell off all the way back down to like 33,000 or whatever, we would have to see the total market cap pull back all the way to the prior highs and retest that. I just didn't think that the market was going to give us that much of an opportunity to get back in. And as you guys can tell, the market is not really letting up. So far in the shorter time frames, this ended up turning into a one-wave impulse like we talked about. We're starting to see the ABC correction come to an end, and the market is now breaking out. This is exactly what we needed to see, because when we're looking at this, the way that you would expect an ABC correction to end is with a strong breakout to the upside. And the reason why is because you're actually starting a brand new impulse. So as it stands right now, we're actually getting ready to break outside of that. Going into this next leg up, I do believe that this is going to be the one that finally clears from all of this consolidation. We've been riding inside of this little descending triangle for the last, couple weeks, and now it looks like we're finally about to be breaking outside of that. So as it goes forward with Bitcoin, on the higher time frames, if we remove our drawing tools, what we're looking at right here is probably a move to about 40,000, and I would say that we could even come up to about 41,000. That's a pretty likely target, and that's the main target I've had, guys. I've been talking about these targets for a long time now, and 40K was a good level that I felt people could take profits on, and they wouldn't necessarily beat themselves up too much. The only thing with taking profits is the fact that if you're going to take profits, you want to make sure that you have a lot of your portfolio sitting in long-term stuff that you already know right now what amount you're going to keep for the long term, so that you don't start, throwing stuff around and then you just get lost in the sauce of the bull market. You want to make sure you already have everything ready to go in place so that you don't overcomplicate things when the real bulk of the bull market sets in. So as we're seeing Bitcoin rallying up to this resistance, even though I've always talked about $48,500 as my main target, that still is my main target, and I do strongly believe Bitcoin can go to that. But just don't be surprised that in the short term, when we run up to this next resistance, if Bitcoin ends up seeing some type of a pullback. I wouldn't be surprised to see that. In the same way, I wouldn't be surprised to see Bitcoin just straight go vertical right here. I don't know what's going to happen, and that's why I continue to preach. It's best to have all of your long-term stuff already ready to go, and then have a short-term portfolio that you do plan to take profits. If you're in profit on a lot of altcoins that are up significantly, then, there's nothing wrong with taking some profits, especially because we don't want to get so married and over-invested into our bags, because if they start dropping, it kind of reminds you and humbles you in the reason why we continue to stick to, being in and out with the short-term stuff, and then having our long-term stuff we genuinely believe in, we know is going to do well long-term, and then just kind of sitting on that portfolio and not changing it up. Now, what I really wanted to talk about today was covering the cycle bottom for the altcoins and the cycle bottom of the last cycle as well. And the reason I wanted to cover both of these is because I think it's important that we understand the time frames. I think it's important that we understand where we were at in the last cycle at this exact same moment of time that we're at right now, and how it applies with potentially what we could see moving forward. Because we talked a lot about the Bitcoin halvings, right? The Bitcoin halvings have always been the real driver of value in the market, or people argue it's not just the Bitcoin halving, it's something else. But regardless of what your opinion is, what we see is the Bitcoin halving happens and the price immediately skyrockets after. So I don't know if it's because the halving or what, it doesn't matter to me. The halving in the last cycle on the total altcoin market cap happened right here, and we can see that we had just finished this big long-term accumulation, and from the bottom of the cycle low at the end of the year to the bottom of the COVID capitulation, the secondary retest of that low, it was 457 days. And so that was about the time that we saw from peak low to peak low of the bear market, the entire consolidation that we saw. Now, coming into this cycle, they're actually really similar. Now, what we ended up seeing here, the only difference was the altcoins bottomed in June, right? Even though Bitcoin made this lower low, the altcoin total market cap ends up holding support. So we see our lowest low in June. So the total time that we've spent in here, well, let's analyze the same time as what we saw over here. So 457 days is going to put us pretty much right here at the low, right before our most recent reversal. And where we're at currently is 527 days. If we come back over here and pull 527 days, we're going to be looking at pretty much this exact time right before our Bitcoin halving. Well, this was actually our Bitcoin halving in the last cycle, but our Bitcoin halving in this cycle isn't until April of 2024. So we have to understand that it's not going to be perfect. And the reason why is because we bottomed at a different point. So the way these markets are going to develop is going to be a little bit different. But the thing we're trying to look at is how much time the entire accumulation and the entire bear market bottom lasted before we started to get that reversal up to the upside. And what we can notice here is pretty much right at the point of, right where we're at right now, about 527 days in, we started to make that next leg up. And this was actually the leg up that broke out of this range high and flipped it as support. And this was the most important breakout on the entire chart at that time. And that's where I put the majority of my Ethereum investment at $340 right here, because I knew it was just such a massive breakout of this massive double bottom formation. And what we saw was a complete trend reversal, right? That was all happening around the exact same time that we're at today. As far as the amount of time that we've spent in this bottom, it's the same to the point of us actually getting ready to flip that high. So I found it interesting that we're kind of at the exact same situation in this current cycle. We're 527 days in. When we're looking at the last cycle, that was right before we made that next leg up to break the range highs. And if we're looking at where our current range highs are, we're, right at that same moment of time where we're just getting ready to break those. Just still consolidating below them, don't have any sort of significant confirmation one way or another. But what we do see is that as the market is breaking out, as Bitcoin is maintaining higher highs, we're most likely going to see this market break out as well. ETH is still maintaining higher highs. ETH is looking really close to breaking out of its resistance. It's sitting up here at pretty much the same level, maybe even a little bit higher. And so when this finally does flip it, we're pretty much looking at the same thing. And I really won't be surprised even in the slightest if we actually do see a similar consolidation. Maybe we don't immediately start to just take off like I have been expecting. Maybe we do something a little bit different. But what if we end up following, the same sort of consolidation that we kind of did, where all we're going to do right now is kind of flip this resistance in some way? I don't know exactly how it's going to look, but what if this is in store for us? Some type of support and resistance flip where we kind of just barely break out here, kind of rally up, maybe tag $860 billion in total market cap, just a little higher than this. And then from there, we fall back down to just kind of consolidate back around. I wouldn't be surprised to see something like that. But in the same way, I also kind of think that we're most likely, if we break out of this range, we'll probably rally up here at the least, and the altcoins could rally a little higher. We could come up to like this mid-range. If Bitcoin comes all the way up to the top of its lower high being 48,500, the altcoins are most likely going to top prematurely of that, just because the way that the altcoins work, they've always kind of lagged, and they already are. I mean, Bitcoin's already all the way up here pretty much, and the altcoins are still waiting to break out of their range. So I think that everything's going to be a little different. The altcoins themselves could be in a little bit more of a consolidation like this before real new all-time highs are to be expected. And don't be surprised, guys. I mean, the market tends to take its time at the beginning of the cycle, and if we flip this range and we go through this longer sort of consolidation just as this bigger retest, don't be surprised, because it could take a decent amount of time. 200-ish days I think is plenty of time that we could spend inside of that consolidation. But I don't necessarily think that we're going to do the same sort of setup like this. I've been drawing where we end up making a little bit of a quicker sort of breakout. We could immediately come back down to retest this, but I don't think it's going to be quite as slow and long going sideways for all of that time. I think it would be a little bit quicker before we started making that next leg up back up to these range highs up here. That's kind of what I would be watching for at least, but a lot of altcoins are going to do their own thing. We've already seen certain altcoins leading the way. The big thing that I want you guys to understand is where we were at least at in the last cycle based off the time frames was the point where we started to break out and actually start that new cycle. And I do believe that we're pretty much at that same moment of time today where we're getting ready to break the range highs no matter what way it plays out. Even if we went all the way up to the top of that lower high in one big significant move, it doesn't really change anything considering the fact I do believe that both cycles are lining up in their own unique ways. The time frames generally will stay the same, and that's why we always like to trade and invest based off the time frames. What we see with the altcoins, what we see with Bitcoin is they'll follow relatively similar time frames. They'll follow similar accumulations. And with the last cycle, that was a pretty lengthy accumulation. So to see that we're at pretty much those exact same time frames gives me a lot of confidence that, you know, the bear market bottom is pretty much over. We're getting ready to leave this accumulation. And the real fun part of the cycle is most likely going to be setting in pretty soon. Now, the final chart I wanted to talk about today is actually the Bitcoin dominance. And this is a very important chart when we're factoring in when are the altcoins going to actually perform. The altcoins are sitting right at that resistance, just awaiting a breakout of the accumulation low, and that's when I think we're going to see a lot of markup. We'll probably end up seeing altcoins perform relatively well, but even in that last cycle when that first breakout happened, they underperformed massively and Bitcoin really kind of took off. And it wasn't until pretty much this point of us flipping those all-time highs, once Bitcoin broke the all-time highs, that's when we saw this really big move inside of the altcoin. So we should kind of anticipate relatively similar sort of price structure. It can vary to some extent, but the big thing that we're looking at here is our all-time descending resistance on the Bitcoin dominance. What we've been at, this was the very beginning of the altcoin cycles for the most part. This was 2017 where we saw this massive move, and then in the 2018 bear market all the way into the 2019 cycle during COVID, we saw this big sort of, you know, final high, this final capitulation, I guess you could say, before our 2020 and 2021 bull run for the altcoins. And that was kind of our next data point when we're looking at our descending resistance. And if you guys notice over here, we're coming very close back into contact with that same range. Now the question is going to be, are we going to actually hit this and it is going to act as descending resistance, or is this thing going to end up peaking above? I think that we're getting pretty close to a topping point. And my main target was pretty much 55%. And that's, you know, right at the low point of this red box, pretty close to where we're at currently. I do think we're about to take one more leg up, and that's where we're going to be finding out whether this is going to hold, what's going to happen with the altcoins. But I do find it interesting that as the altcoins are finally at this resistance, I wouldn't be surprised that if we flip this, we did actually see some short-term outperformance in those altcoins, and maybe that's the point where we do see some sort of, you know, top. Even if we kind of peaked above here, if we ended up closing back below and doing something like this, then we could be looking at a major cycle top, a reversal for the Bitcoin dominance before we end up seeing this thing kind of trend all the way back down. What we're looking at big picture, in our last cycle, the altcoins never made a new low, or Bitcoin dominance never made a new low, I should say. Altcoins never went into price discovery against their Bitcoin ratios. That was the big difference in 2017. If we see this big bulk of the sell-off happening, this was the massive bull run in 2017 when all of the altcoins were taking off like crazy. This was our last cycle for the altcoins, and even though we saw good profits, it's obvious to tell that this was not even close to as big as that 2017 bull run was. And what I've been preaching inside of this cycle is that I believe that this coming bull run will actually mirror a lot more according to what we saw in 2017, how big that bull market was and how profitable it was for altcoins. And I do think that that's what's lining up for this cycle. Once we do finally top wherever that's going to be, I do believe that the higher we go, the more upside there is for altcoins, because my main target for this cycle is 20% to 10% Bitcoin dominance, all the way down in here, which it would be the first time that we had finally broken and actually made a new all-time low since 2017. And so that's kind of why I think it will be the most profitable cycle for altcoins, is because this will be the first time they're actually in price discovery against their Bitcoin ratios since this 2017 bull run. And that's something we just didn't see in the last cycle. That's the reason why I think it was so much more lackluster. There were certain niches and narratives that took off, DeFi, NFTs, things like that. But this is the cycle I think that everything's going to really perform well, and we're going to see a lot of funny money entering the market, especially when the institutions come in. So I wanted to give you guys this update, break down down the markets, explain what we're seeing. Bitcoin's breaking out, the market's looking exceptionally bullish, and everything's looking good for more upside ahead. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you guys did find value in this, do me a favor and leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos. If you guys want to join the Discord server or check out any of my socials, you can check out the link in the description and see them all. Or you guys can actually sign up for my Discord server, my private access, and see all of the trades that I take over this bull run. Anything I'm buying, selling, trading, anything I'm doing with my money, any analysis, any sort of stuff like that. Links are in the description to go ahead and sign up for that on my website. It's one-time payment, lifetime access. Currently running a 50% off discount, and it's only going to last a couple more days. So if you guys want to get access, you got to join now. Links are in the description. Thank you all so much. And with that being said, I'll catch you in the next one. As always, peace out.